The story starts with this: a mask, said to grant its wearer powers beyond comprehension. As far as I can tell, the mask was made sometime in the 13th century by a member of a forgotten African tribe. Through unknown means, it ended up with a slave in the United States in the 19th century. She did her best to lay low and to conceal the mask's existence. But just 1 year before the Emancipation Proclamation was passed, she took ill and died. She left the mask to a close friend, my great-great-grandfather, Emanuel Haynes. She told him never to attempt to wear the mask, but instead to protect it from those who might seek to abuse its power. And he heeded her words. But his son, Robert Haynes, my great-grandfather, did not. He grew up on stories about the mask that granted its wearer the powers of the gods, stories the slave had told his father in bondage. When it was time to pick a career, Robert chose anthropology and dedicated his life to studying the mask's origins and the powers it held within. One day when his research hit a wall, he felt he had very little choice. He needed a more direct approach. He chose to ignore his father's teachings and don the mask himself. Robert's family and friends said that he wasn't the same after that. He lost weight, his skin paled, his eyes lost their light, and it wasn't long before he disappeared. This is General Lyle Truesdale, a notorious treasure hunter. You may remember him as the guy who found El Dorado, Dracula's coffin, and the last dodo bird. But discoveries like those actually meant nothing to him. What he really wanted was power. Power that he believed he could obtain from magical artifacts that he was certain existed in great number in this world. You just had to know where to look. And he did. It didn't take long before Lyle learned the details of Robert's disappearance, and it took even less time for him to connect the dots and pay a visit to the Haynes residence. For weeks, he frequented the family home with questions of mystical artifacts. Of course, they denied him every time and sent him on his way, but Lyle was a persistent man. One day he became agitated and refused to leave without seeing for himself. He overturned every inch of the house looking for the mask, but he wouldn't find it, because it wasn't there. It was at Yale, with Robert's oldest son, Dwayne, my grandfather. Dwayne chose to pick up where his father left off, and to study the mask himself. Through his research, he discovered that the mask was not an anomaly. Just as Lyle suspected, there were many more like it scattered around the globe. Lyle caught up with my grandfather many years later, but this time was different. For starters, he had a different face. General Lyle Truesdale had disappeared years before after being discharged from the Army for a series of offenses that had been collectively filed under disorderly conduct. But, although my grandfather didn't know at the time, this was him. Lyle approached my grandfather not as a man of the government, but as a fellow scientist who shared his interest in all things fantastic and mysterious. He won him over effortlessly, without ever revealing his true identity. Years went by with very little progress. Dwayne was as driven as ever, but Lyle began to lose his patience. One day, Lyle decided that he would wear the mask, that he no longer cared about consequences. Dwayne fought the mask away from him, and it was then that Lyle revealed himself. Then, to my grandfather's surprise, Lyle's body became enveloped in flames. Lyle had found other artifacts and obtained their power. My grandfather had no choice. He put on the mask. The following battle between them destroyed their lab and much of the surrounding area. When police arrived at the scene, no bodies were found, and no masks. Dwayne left behind a daughter, my mother. She was young at the time, but old enough to see that my grandfather's obsession was what brought his demise. She wanted nothing to do with masks, magic, or mystery. But my father had an adventurous spirit. He'd read fantasy and adventure novels all of his life, and as I grew up, he passed these stories down to me as well. And if nothing else, I learned that when the wizard comes to your door, you don't turn him away without an adventure. Earlier this year, I got a knock at my front door. When I went to answer, no one was there. But there on my doorstep was the mask. At the time, I really didn't think I had much of a choice. I took the mask and I've been hiding ever since. A month ago, I saw Lyle, no older than the day he met my grandfather 50 years ago. He watched me through a crowd, eyes lifeless, skin pale. I saw him again today. I think he followed me home. Actually, I'm positive he did. I'm sorry, Mom, but I've got to know.